Okay, guys, welcome back to our Reading Between the Wines, our Cooper Book Club. We are on chapter 12. And last week, I shared my screen with you guys and kind of showed you guys how to ABC, how to ABC everything. So I don't know if you guys were here last week. If you weren't, go back and watch the video because I was explaining to them how it's so much easier for you to figure out if it's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment or negative punishment if you break it down into ABC for yourself, because you always want to look at the consequence and see what's happening. Is the behavior increasing, or am I trying to decrease a behavior? So just being able to break it down into ABC. So we were kind of all over the place going over everything because I was getting too excited. But okay, so concepts and principles before define and provide examples of positive and negative reinforcement contingencies. So since we already kind of went over it, and I always tell the girls that the best way to learn is by teaching others. So I'm going to let somebody define positive reinforcement and give us an example. Who wants to try?
Positive reinforcement is basically when you add something or give something tangible or whatever that increases the future likelihood of a behavior. For instance, I was working with a client today on commenting and we were playing with stickers. So every time he commented, I pulled out a new little sheet of stickers and put it on the table, which increased his commenting because he was getting more stickers.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Way to go, Eileen. All right, so who wants to define negative reinforcement and provide an example?
Something is removed.
Yeah, removal of an aversive stimulus that's going to increase the likelihood of the behavior in the future. And so we talked last week that it's about hashtag relief. So anytime the end result or your consequence is relief, you're most likely negatively reinforcing some type of behavior. So we talked about the microwave. The microwave is beeping. It's annoying, so you go and open it. The stove, same thing. Stove is going crazy, so you run over there to turn it off. The teapot is going crazy, so you run over there and you turn it off. That's relief. Your alarm clock in the morning, you run over there or whatever, turn it off. So all of those where you're getting that relief feeling. So you're in some type of an aversive situation.
My camera's on.
You're in some type of aversive situation, and then you get some type of relief. Okay. So what about behavior change procedures? G1, use positive and negative reinforcement procedures to strengthen a behavior. Okay, so we kind of already talked about that. So definition of negative reinforcement, we did that. So the difference between positive and negative, we talked about it being not necessarily meaning good and bad, right? Positive just means that we're adding something. And it's usually we're adding some type of wanted stimulus. And then negative reinforcement is we're removing some type of aversive stimulus. Positive reinforcement versus punishment. Negative reinforcement is sometimes confused with punishment for two reasons. So you guys will see that question on a lot of mocks. Is negative reinforcement punishment? The answer is going to be no. So first, because the lay term for positive reinforcement is reward, people mistakenly consider negative reinforcement as a technical term for the opposite of reinforcement, so aka punishment. So before you were in ABA, or maybe if you tried to explain it to your spouse, So I always give people the example of me trying to explain a spanking to my husband. And so I'm telling him that it's positive punishment. And he's like, well, how could it be positive if it's a spanking? And so I'm like trying to explain, I'm like, it's not like a positive experience. It's just that we added something aversive. And so it's hard for regular folks to understand the wording. So it's just wanting you to make sure that you know the difference between negative reinforcement versus punishment. So they're not the same. Okay. A second source of confusion stems from the fact that the stimuli involved in both negative reinforcement and punishment are by definition aversive. So that's another reason why people think that it might be punishment, because you're in an aversive situation. So they're like, oh, that must be punishment because you're being punished by the sound of the teapot. But that's not the case. So just be very careful with knowing the differences between the two. So when we remove the aversive stimulus that you were in, so you were in this aversive box and then you got out of your aversive box, so that's going to be your negative reinforcement. We also talked about escape and avoidance contingencies. So escape being that we have already come into contact with the experience. So you're in this aversive situation and you're trying to get out of it. So I've already come into contact with it and I'm trying to get out. So that's escape. Avoidance is going to be, I have a history, or I know that the police officer always posts up in the corner right there checking everybody's speed. So since I love to speed, I'm going to go around him a different way. So that's going to be an avoidance contingency.
Or use Waze.
Yeah, use Waze.
Is that an avoidance contingency?
It could be, yeah, because you're trying to avoid traffic, right? Waze is
the cops.
Yeah, the cops, traffic. So Waze is just one big avoidance app.
Wow, that's smart. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Characteristics of negative reinforcement. I think we went over most of chapter 12. What do you think, Peace? Because you are the one that always keeps track and I always get all off topic.
I think we've done much.
Okay, so some characteristics of negative reinforcement: any response that successfully terminates an aversive stimulus will be strengthened as a result. Behaviors may be acquired and maintained by negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement may play an important role in the development of academic skills, but it can also account for the development of disruptive or dangerous behaviors. Unconditioned negative reinforcers are stimuli whose removal strengthens behavior in the absence of prior learning. So remember, anytime you see unconditioned means that they are unlearned. So I never knew that that was going to happen. So that's going to be your unconditioned negative reinforcers. Conditioned negative reinforcers are stimuli whose removal strengthens behavior as a result of previous pairing with other negative reinforcers. So if they talk about anything like that in the exam, just remember unconditioned, unlearned, conditioned is learned. Social negative reinforcement involves the termination through the action of another person. So I'll give you guys the example of a socially mediated negative reinforcement. So I'm in training for a new job right now and everything is via Zoom. And I text my husband and I'm like, can you boil some water for me so that I can make coffee? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he set it up for me. and it was going off, but I'm not supposed to leave the screen because I have to ask or tell them before I step out. So I had to text him and tell him, can you please come turn off the pot? So that was socially mediated. I needed him to help me to turn it off. Automatic negative reinforcement. So those are those ones that feel, if something feels good to me and nobody else can compete with it. So you can give examples like scratching an itch. Oh, that's so much better. Or like some of the kids and their automatic self-stimulatory behaviors, where it's like something, it's some type of sensory regulation that might be off in their body. And so this action is making me feel better or whatever. We don't know what's going on inside them. So that's something automatic that's reinforced within them. And so always remember, if it's automatic, they don't need anybody around. So if you're doing an FA, automatic is going to be that alone condition. So is the behavior still occurring when he's alone? Most likely going to be automatic. Okay. In general, negative reinforcement for a given response will be more effective when a stimulus change immediately follows the occurrence of target response. So same thing, reinforcement is always going to be, we're still going to follow those same rules, right? You want to make sure that it's delivered immediately following the correct response to strengthen that behavior. The magnitude is large. The target response consistency produces escape from or postponement of EO. Reinforcement is unavailable for competing responses. Okay. Some applications of negative reinforcement. Although negative reinforcement is a fundamental principle of learning that has been studied extensively in basic research, applied behavior analysis has heavily emphasized the use of positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You want to first see if I can use positive reinforcement before I start using that negative reinforcement for ethical reasons, right? Because we know that in negative reinforcement, you're placing them in an aversive situation. So as a BCBA and as a human, you want to do your best to keep these little babies from being in an unpleasant situation. Applied researchers have explored the therapeutic use of negative reinforcement in treating pediatric feeding programs. So it can be used for feeding. Improvements in student performance as a result of error correction that involves repeating a learning trial, having the student practice correct performance, or giving the student additional work may be a function of negative reinforcement. So example can be like, if you failed the BCBA exam, now you're going to be more motivated to pass it the next time, or you're going to study harder this time because you really want to pass it. So that's what they're saying, that it helps with improving student performance. The presentation of task demands during instruction may function as an EO for escape. Initial forms of escape may include lack of attention. Another thing is you can teach negative reinforcement. So that's one of my favorite things as a modern BCBA, how you want to make sure that everything is client-centered and assent and consent. A lot of times the client is engaging in this behavior because he wants to escape. So let me just teach him how to gain access to that negative reinforcement. So it doesn't have to necessarily be that I'm putting him in an aversive situation to increase some type of behavior. It's that he encountered an aversive situation and doesn't know how to react to it. So it's my job to teach him. And so instead of being like, oh, because he's doing this for escape, I have to follow through. No, you not necessarily. You can just teach him how to get out of it, and that can be our new focus. So we're going to focus now on him saying, no, thank you. That's one of my favorites. I teach my clients, no, thank you. More time, please. And all of those that can get them that same reinforcement. So I want to escape the teacher because she's saying, all right, little Billy, it's time to go back to the table and do our work. And he's like, ah! Starts screaming. And that would be a perfect opportunity for teaching. And so that's when I would prompt the therapist to do the more time program. Oh, you can say more time, please. And then he's like, more time, please. And I have my therapist use differential reinforcement. So because he screamed and I had to prompt him to say more time, he might only get 30 seconds. So after the 30 seconds is up and the timer goes off by itself, and he tells me on his own without me having to prompt him, he's like, more time, please. I'm like, oh, yay, good job. Now you can have 2 minutes of more time. And so just using those opportunities to teach. So negative reinforcement isn't always bad. You can use that to your advantage. So use that, teach them how to gain access to that reinforcement that they're looking for. Extinction of behavior maintained by negative reinforcement involves not allowing the response to avoid or terminate its programmed consequence. So they're talking about extinction of behaviors maintained by negative reinforcement. So what they're saying is those escape maintained behaviors, they're putting them on extinction by what? Doing the opposite of that. So we're going to follow through, right? So that's what they're saying. So extinction is going to be that we're not going to allow them to avoid it. We're going to follow through because we want to put that screaming behavior on extinction, let's just say. But what we've learned over time as ABA is evolving is that you don't always just have to go straight to extinction. You can provide a learning opportunity, kind of like I'm explaining to you guys. So instead of me just ignoring him every time he screams when it's time to go back to the table, I can teach him how to say more time. And that way he's able to gain access to that same reinforcement that he was looking for. And he's learning how to functionally communicate to me what he needs. So just know what extinction is, but know that it's not always the needed intervention, if that makes sense. One strategy for treating problem behaviors maintained by negative reinforcement is to strengthen a more socially appropriate replacement behavior through negative reinforcement. So that's exactly what I just said. So teaching him to say, more time, please, so that he's able to escape that work, but in a functional way. He just told the teacher, hey, I'm not ready to go back to the table yet. Can I please have some more time? But yeah, so giving them those replacement behaviors that are more socially appropriate. So me screaming in my classroom is not really going to be okay. But if I told the teacher, more time, please, she could probably let him play there for an extra 30 seconds and kind of give him back the control and be like, okay, little Billy, you can have 30 seconds. Meanwhile, I get the rest of the class to the table. And then when the 30 seconds is up, you're like, okay, it's time to come to the table. And he's more likely to comply because you complied with his request. So just keeping those things in mind. Results of some research have shown that interventions based on positive reinforcement can also be effective as a treatment for problem behavior maintained by negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement. Okay, I'm trying to think of an example. Can anybody think of an example of using positive reinforcement for a problem behavior maintained by negative reinforcement? So he's always trying to escape. Okay, I have an idea. So let's say he's always trying to escape. And so every time he Every time he screams, they usually will let him just get out of the task, right? So he has a learned history that if I scream, the teacher's not going to make me do this assignment. So instead, we can use positive reinforcement with like Eileen's example where she's giving stickers, right? So it's like, okay, time to come to the table. And anytime he doesn't scream, she gives him a sticker or something like that. So that can be an example of using positive reinforcement as a replacement for those negatively reinforced behaviors. I don't know, I'm just trying to give you guys an example. You guys can add to that if you want to. Changes in teacher and caregiver responding as a function of negative reinforcement. Another dimension of negative reinforcement involves effects on caregiver behavior. Student problem behavior serves as an EO for teacher escape and avoidance, and teacher responses to problem behavior are maintained by negative reinforcement. So we talked about that last week as well. So pretty much we went over chapter 12, but we talked about, these are my favorite, the behavior trap, right? Where it's like the teacher or the caregiver is going to give in to the behavior because she doesn't want to hear him screaming anymore. So she's like, all right, fine, you can have your toy. And so that was positively reinforcing his screaming and negatively reinforcing me as a teacher, because now I don't have to listen to him scream anymore. And then last week we had that example where my dog was in the kennel and he was barking really loudly, and it was disturbing my class. So I was like, okay guys, hold on. So I ran over there, I let him out of the kennel, and he just roamed around the house free and happy. And so what happened there is I positively reinforced his behavior of barking. So now he knows that if I want to get out of this kennel, or I guess it could be negative reinforcement for him. But anyways, it's a behavior, they call it a behavior trap. So I reinforced his behavior and it also reinforced me. I'm like, whew, I don't have to hear him screaming anymore. And now I can continue my class. So that's what they're saying about caregiver responding as a function of negative reinforcement. So once you become a BCBA or a clinician, you will be able to give those examples to parents. So you might give them a background on what reinforcement and punishment is, and then you can talk to them about how sometimes we reinforce their behaviors inadvertently. We don't even realize it, but it's because we want some relief ourselves. I have that. I had that problem with my daughter when we were trying to get rid of the bottle. I would still give her the bottle all the time because I couldn't stand her screaming. It would drive me crazy. And you know, like it's a new baby and you're a new mom. And so you're like, oh my God, she's crying. She's hurt, or I don't know. So it just overwhelms you. My anxiety would get the best of me. So I would just give her the bottle. And so I'm getting negatively reinforced because now I don't have to hear the screaming and I can go to sleep. And then she's getting positively reinforced by getting the bottle. And so it was like a never ending vicious cycle until finally my husband had to just throw away the bottle so that I couldn't engage in that behavior anymore.
But you're actually reinforcing a negative behavior of the screaming, right?
I call it extinction.
Well, so
Throwing out the
so the negative reinforcement is the screaming, yeah. So I get relief, like, whew, I don't have to hear the screaming anymore. But I positively reinforce the screaming by giving her the bottle. So now she knows if I just scream loud enough, then I can get the bottle. And then what Olga is saying is extinction. So Charles put me and Emery on extinction basically because he threw away the bottle. And now I don't have that luxury of giving her the bottle. And so now she's just gonna have to scream it out and go through her extinction burst and start kicking and throwing things. And because we know that during extinction, it always gets worse before it gets better. So now she's gonna be going crazy. But like Olga said, we're gonna put that behavior on extinction because it's just not gonna be an option anymore. It's completely gone.
You put
Got
the
it.
baby's behavior on extinction, but I thought extinction is only if you can still engage in a behavior without getting reinforcement for it. So if you can no longer give the bottle, that wouldn't be extinction, right? Because you can't
Um,
perform that behavior to get that reinforcement.
Yeah, you're getting really deep. Okay, so
Sorry.
I'm thinking about extinction on the baby, but on myself, um,
That would be more like response blocking, except for it's a really long-term
Yeah.
response block.
yeah, it's not extinction for me because she's still screaming. Yeah, I guess you're right. It's kind of like response blocking. We're gonna have to put a pin on that one because you made my brain kind of go like.
It took me a long time to like wrap my head around extinction only being if you can still exhibit the behavior. Because I remember an example that was if somebody's hitting their head and you put like a helmet on so they can no longer hit their head. That's response blocking, not extinction, because they can't complete that behavior to
Oh,
have that
yeah.
extinction.
And it's also really hard to put automatically maintained behaviors on extinction. So that behavior. Yes. Yes, when we get into that, I also struggled with that. I had to write a paper one time like that, and I kept getting it wrong because I was saying like put gloves on them, but they're like putting gloves on them is just response blocking because they can still engage in the behavior. Yes. Ethical considerations for using negative reinforcement. So just always remembering those ethical concerns about the use of positive and negative reinforcement are similar and arise from the severity of the antecedent EO that occasions behavior. So I don't like those goals where it's like let's say we're teaching him to mend for a break, or you're teaching him to say stop please, right? So you're teaching them to say stop please when they don't want something. And so you tell your technicians, you're like, hey, contrive an aversive situation so that he can say stop please. So that will be one of those things where it's like ethically, like that doesn't feel right, you know? So I tell them, hey, you might not always get to run this program because they might not always encounter an aversive situation, and that's okay. I want you guys to teach that goal only when you encounter an aversive situation. I don't want you to contrive aversive situations, if that makes sense. So that's one of those like ethical considerations for negative reinforcement, because you are manipulating the MO, right? You are contriving some type of aversive situation so that they could get out of it. And that's not very nice. So just think about that whenever you think about negative reinforcement and the ethical considerations. And then another concern with negative reinforcement is that the presence of an aversive stimuli can itself generate behaviors that compete with the acquisition of desired behavior. So you might encounter a new behavior that you weren't even targeting. So just being very careful about those contriving aversives and letting those negative reinforcement teaching opportunities come a little bit more naturally. I don't know if anybody is in the field or has supervisors that tell you to contrive aversives. It's kind of, I don't know, controversial, I feel like. So just let them be a little bit more naturally occurring. Okay, we finished 12 really fast. Because we kind of already did it last week. Do you guys want to try to take the 12 quiz on Pearson VUE?
Sure.
Yeah.